Right, ready to unlock some secrets of human nature. You sent over some excerpts from this book, The Laws of Human Nature. And let me tell you, this book does not hold back.
It's brutally honest, like a breath of fresh air.
Right. It's like the book is saying, hey, enough with the charade. Let's get real about what drives us, even the messy stuff. And it does it through all these stories about historical figures.
It's so smart, the way the author uses history. So we see these laws play out in the lives of, well, people who actually shaped the world.
Okay, so the first law, the law of irrationality, we like to think we're so in control, but this book is saying, not so much. Emotions are often calling the shots.
Oh, yeah. Think about it. How many times have you bought something you didn't even need just because it was like 50% off?
Oh my gosh, all the time.
Sure.
Talking directly to me, huh? Okay, what about like when you meet someone and you instantly decide they're amazing just because they have a nice smile?
Mm-hmm.
That's the halo effect, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're letting that one good quality totally blind you to everything else.
And then there's that project, we've all been there, that you keep pouring hours into, even though it's clearly going nowhere. Sunk cost fallacy, right?
Yep, we get so attached to what we've already invested, we can't even admit it's time to cut our losses.
So how do we fight this? The book talks about Pericles, the Athenian statesman. He was all about cultivating nous, which is like the mind or intellect, as a way to, counter that emotional sway.
Right. Pericles, he really believed that clear thinking, not just knee-jerk emotional reactions, was the key to, making good decisions. Imagine if we all did that today, right? Like instead of impulse buying that thing online, you take a minute, you pause, and you consider your budget. Or before you jump into a relationship, just because the chemistry is amazing, you think, okay, do our values actually align?
It's like taking a Periclean pause before emotions run away with us. I like that.
Cultivating that self-awareness, it can make a huge difference.
All right, next up. The shadow. This is where it gets interesting. This chapter gets into all that, the not so pretty stuff about ourselves, the things we try to hide.
Yeah, think of it as like the underbelly of our personality. It's where we stash all those desires and impulses that we're taught are bad or unacceptable.
So we all have this shadow lurking within us.
Oh, absolutely. The book uses Richard Nixon as an example. He had that very carefully crafted public image, but behind that was a whole other side prone to, paranoia and vindictiveness, as we saw.
So how does this shadow even develop?
It starts early, childhood. We're taught that some emotions like anger, jealousy, aggression, those aren't nice, so we have to suppress them. But of course, those feelings don't magically disappear. They just go underground, becoming part of that shadow self.
And if we ignore it, can it sabotage us?
Exactly. That's what's so interesting about this concept. The book argues that when we acknowledge our shadow, we can actually integrate it into our personalities in a healthy way. It's not about becoming those negative qualities. It's about understanding that they're there and learning to, manage them.
Okay, this is a little bit of a mind bender. Think about someone you admire. Maybe they're super generous. But flip that quality. Could they also have a hidden side of maybe stinginess?
That's a great question. It helps us start to see that we all have these contradictions within us, even those people we put on pedestals. And of course, that includes ourselves too.
All right, time to talk about something I'm sure we've all experienced. Envy.
Chapter 10 does a deep dive on this one, that green-eyed monster. And it's, not pretty. It's that feeling when you see someone else has something you want, whether it's success, possessions, a relationship, you name it.
And the book argues that envy is often running the show more than we realize, even when we try to tell ourselves we're, happy for them.
Yeah, we're really good at dismissing it, I'm just happy for them. But then, you find yourself subtly undermining their achievements or, pulling away from the relationship.
The book uses the example of Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. She had a friend, Jane, who was at first super supportive of her writing, but as Mary became more famous, Jane became consumed with envy.
Right. Think about that. Even someone as successful and talented as Mary Shelley had to deal with the sting of another person's envy.
So how do we deal with this if, we're the ones feeling it?
The book offers some really good advice. First, just acknowledge it. Trying to bury envy only makes it stronger. Then, try to create some distance. You don't have to cut people out of your life, but just be mindful of how much you expose yourself to situations that, trigger those feelings. Maybe take a break from social media if you find yourself constantly comparing yourself to everyone's perfect life.
Social media is definitely a breeding ground for envy. But instead of just focusing on what we don't have, the book also reminds us to appreciate what we do have.
Exactly. Gratitude. Right?
Yeah.
That's a powerful antidote to envy. Shift your focus to your own accomplishments and all the good things in your life.
All right, so we've got irrationality, the shadow, envy, feeling a bit exposed here. But the book doesn't just point out the problems, it also offers a path forward.
That's what makes it so powerful. It's about using that knowledge of human nature to make better choices and ultimately live a more fulfilling life.
Okay, are you ready for our next deep dive? This one's all about the power of purpose.
So, in a world where traditional structures, religions and such, those have kind of weakened for a lot of people, having a purpose is more important than ever. Gives us direction, motivation, meaning, right.
The book says that without it, we can end up feeling lost, adrift, lacking direction.
It's like a ship without a rudder, just tossed out with no destination.
So how do we find our purpose? The book talks about Martin Luther King Jr. and his journey to, well, find his calling.
Yeah, even someone as extraordinary as Dr. King struggled with this, It wasn't like some sudden epiphany. It was this ongoing process of self-discovery and struggle.
So it's not like there's this one perfect purpose out there waiting for us to just bump into it.
Exactly. It's more about asking yourself, what really motivates me? What are those activities that make me feel truly alive and engaged? What impact do I want to have on the world?
It's about tuning into those moments of excitement, passion, and then, having the courage to actually take action, even if it's just small steps to align our lives with that.
That's it. And it's important to remember your purpose might not be this grand world-changing mission, It could be something as simple as being a great friend or bringing joy to your community. The important thing is to find something that truly resonates with you and fuels you to take action.
One last big idea for this part of our deep dive. It's something that we often don't even think about. The influence of our generation.
This is where it gets really interesting. It's all about how those big historical events, and those cultural shifts that define a generation, how those shape our values, our beliefs, even our fears.
So we're all carrying around this invisible baggage from our generation.
Think of it as a shared lens through which we see the world. For example, the book talks about how World War II impacted the silent generation, instilling the sense of duty and sacrifice. Then you have the sexual revolution and how it shaped Gen X, right? Leading to this more individualistic and questioning outlook. And of course, there's the influence of 9/11 on millennials, shaping their whole worldview, their relationship with authority.
So how do we, apply this to our own lives? I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, my generation shaped me, but what do I do with that information?
It's about becoming aware of those generational patterns that might be unconsciously driving, your decisions and behaviors. For example, if you're a baby boomer who, grew up valuing hard work, dedication, you might butt heads with a millennial colleague who, prioritizes work-life balance. So understanding those differences can really help us bridge those gaps and, lead to better communication and understanding.
So this deep dive into the laws of human nature, it's not just about, understanding ourselves, but also understanding the people around us, and all those forces that have shaped their perspectives.
It's all connected.
We've covered so much today. Irrationality, the shadow, envy, the influence of our generation.
And this is just the beginning. There's so much more to uncover in this book, and I can't wait to dive into it with you in part 2 of our deep dives.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the laws of human nature. Last time, we were talking about how your generation's unique experiences, they're probably shaping your worldview even today.
And now get ready for a total shift. This next chapter, the law of defensive attitude. All about, those walls we put up, those invisible barriers that stop us from truly connecting with others.
We've all been there, right? Hurt, rejected, judged. I mean, it's natural to want to protect ourselves, but the book argues that this defensive attitude, it can backfire, Makes us less open to new ideas, less open to feedback, less likely to grow. Yeah, I can see that. So how do we break down these walls, both in ourselves and in others? The book has to have some ideas, right?
It does, and it's going to sound a little strange at first. The key is to actually confirm people's self-opinions, even if we disagree with them.
Wait, really? So instead of trying to, change their mind, we just validate their existing beliefs? That seems, I don't know, kind of backwards.
I know it seems that way, but think about it. One of our deepest human needs is to feel validated, to have our self-image, confirmed by others. So when we acknowledge how someone sees themselves, even if it's negative, it actually makes them more open to, our influence.
Like we're saying, I see you, I hear you, I get you. And that makes them feel safe enough to let their guard down.
Exactly. Their defenses come down, and they're much more likely to listen to what you have to say.
Okay, so let's get practical. How do we actually do this?
It all starts with becoming a master listener. I mean, not just passively hearing someone, but truly absorbing their words, understanding their perspective, even those nonverbal cues. What are they saying between the lines?
I see what you mean. It's about making them feel truly seen and heard, which then creates the space for, well, genuine connection. And then maybe you can have some influence.
Exactly. And, little bonus tip, incorporate a little bit of gentle physical touch, light touch on the arm or shoulder. That can create a subconscious sense of connection and trust.
Right. But of course, read the room. Don't want to make anyone uncomfortable.
Of course. Always be mindful of boundaries.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all about finding that sweet spot between active listening, genuine validation, and creating that sense of, camaraderie.
This all sounds great for, people who are actually open to connection. But what about those people who are just resistant to any kind of influence? The types love to argue, playing the victim.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. For the chronic complainers, the ones who always see themselves as the victim, honestly, the best approach is often to create some distance. Don't get sucked into their drama.
And the passive-aggressive types, the ones who are always making you feel like you're walking on eggshells. You never know what they really want.
With those folks, it's important to remember their behavior is often a power play, They get off on keeping you off balance. So the best thing you can do is try to detach emotionally. Remember, it's not about you. It's about their insecurities.
So distance, detachment, and a healthy dose of understanding. Those are our tools.
Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is just walk away, All right, ready to explore that mysterious realm we touched on earlier? The shadow.
Oh, I'm ready. Lay it on me. This is the part of ourselves we try so hard to keep hidden, all right?
Right. The book says the shadow, it starts developing really early in life as we learn to fit in, to meet those societal expectations, We're told to suppress certain emotions, the ones that aren't acceptable. Anger, jealousy, aggression, and all that gets pushed down, It retreats into the shadows.
Lurking beneath the surface.
Yeah, and it can influence us in ways that we don't even realize. The book uses Nixon again, remember, that perfect public image, but then his darker side, it ultimately led to his downfall. It's a reminder that if we deny those darker impulses, they can come back to bite us.
Okay, so how do we even start to, explore this thing that we've spent our whole lives suppressing?
Well, one way is to pay attention to those times when we just, we have these sudden outbursts of emotion. Those times when we react in a way that's totally out of character?
Like when you snap at someone over something tiny. Or you suddenly feel this wave of anxiety, like in a totally normal situation.
Exactly. Those could be signs of the shadow poking through, It could be rooted in some deep fear or insecurity that we've never really dealt with.
It's like our carefully crafted persona, the mask we show the world, it cracks. And we get this glimpse of that shadow self.
The book also says to pay attention to how we react to, sudden successes and failures. Like unexpected victories, they can trigger these addictive patterns or lead to overconfidence. And crushing defeats, they can reactivate old childhood wounds.
So basically, pay attention to those extreme emotional swings and try to, trace them back to the source.
Another way is to look at the things that really irritate us in other people. Those people who just push our buttons.
Oh, this is interesting. You're saying that those, intense dislikes, those could actually be projections of our own shadow. We hate it in them because it's something that we've disowned in ourselves.
It's a tough exercise, but it can be so insightful. If you catch yourself judging someone really harshly, ask yourself, is this judgment maybe reflecting something I'm trying to hide in myself?
Wow. That's deep. So instead of getting caught up in judging others, we can use those reactions as a starting point for self-reflection.
The book also says to look for the shadow in our dreams.
Our dreams, really? I mean, I always thought those were just, random firings of neurons.
They might seem random, but dreams can give us this direct line into, the unconscious mind. It's where those repressed fears and desires, they play out in this symbolic way. So the book says, pay attention to the feeling of the dream, Don't worry so much about interpreting specific symbols.
So if a dream makes me feel anxious or uneasy, it could be pointing to an unresolved issue I've been avoiding, even if I don't get the specific images.
Right. And if it fills you with excitement or a sense of liberation, it could be a clue that there's a passion that you're afraid to pursue in your waking life. The book actually recommends keeping a dream journal.
Oh, I like that. Become your own dream detective.
And lastly, the book says to look for the shadow in our everyday behavior. You know, those times when we act in a way that feels kind of fake, like we're wearing a mask, or when we sabotage ourselves.
So those patterns, they're like clues to that shadow,
Yeah.
revealing those parts of ourselves that we're trying to keep under wraps.
The book argues that by, really shining a light on these hidden aspects, we can start to integrate them into our conscious personality, and that makes us more whole, more authentic.
This is so fascinating, but I have to admit, it's a little bit scary too, right? Like opening up Pandora's box. What if we don't like what we find?
That's a normal fear, but remember, the point isn't to become our shatter, It's to acknowledge those darker parts and learn to integrate them in a healthy way. So it's about self-awareness, not self-loathing.
It's about expanding our capacity to accept all of ourselves.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey. All right, ready to tackle another big one? Envy.
Ugh, that green-eyed monster. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but chapter 10 really goes deep.
This chapter says envy drives our actions way more than we want to admit, even when we try to dress it up as something else. It's that resentment, Feeling inadequate when we think someone else has something that we should have.
And it can look like so many things. Subtle digs, sabotage. The book even breaks it down into different types of envious people.
Oh, yeah. You have the levelers who just want to tear down anyone who's more successful. They can't stand to see others do well, so they try to bring them down to their level.
And then there are the status drivers, always trying to climb that social ladder, even if they have to step on people to get there.
Right. And then you have the adjuncts. They latch on to successful people, hoping to, soak up some of that glory without putting in the work themselves.
Wow. I can think of people who fit into each of those categories. It's kind of scary how accurate that is.
The book uses the example of Mary Shelley again. Remember her friend Jane? She was great at first, supportive, but then as Mary's fame grew, so did Jane's envy. She started, spreading rumors, trying to damage Mary's relationships, trying to, sabotage her success. Classic example of how envy can poison even close friendships.
So if we find ourselves feeling envious, what do we do?
The first step is just to admit it, name it. Trying to, bury envy, that only gives it more power.
It's like bringing those feelings into the light instead of letting them fester in the dark.
Exactly. And then, try to understand them. Ask yourself, where's this envy coming from? What need is it trying to, fulfill? The book also suggests putting some distance between yourself and, whatever or whoever is triggering those feelings. Like if you're scrolling through social media and you just feel that envy creeping in, maybe step away for a bit.
It's so easy to get caught up in the comparison game on social media. It's definitely a trigger for me.
But it's also important to remember comparison really is the thief of joy. Instead of focusing on what we lack, we have to appreciate what we do have,
Right.
Celebrate those wins, even the small ones.
Celebrate those wins, yes. Okay, so we've talked about envy, but now I'm curious about this law of presumption. What is that all about?
Chapter 11, this is all about overconfidence and, the importance of recognizing our limits. It's about that balance between believing in ourselves, which we have to do, and staying grounded in reality.
We all need a certain amount of, self-esteem to function in the world, but the book is saying we have to be careful about letting it get, inflated, right?
Right. If we need constant validation, if that need gets too big, it can lead to presumption, this unwarranted sense of superiority. We start believing that we're more talented, more intelligent, or more special than we actually are. And that can lead us to make, some really bad decisions.
The book talks about Michael Eisner, the former CEO of Disney, right?
Yeah.
As an example of this. He was brilliant, but eventually, success went to his head.
He became so autocratic, started micromanaging everybody, alienated everyone who, dared to disagree with him. Classic example of how presumption can blind us to our own flaws. And that can lead to, not just problems in our personal relationships, but also, problems at work.
Like they say, pride goeth before the fall. So how do we avoid this? How do we stay humble?
The first step is to cultivate self-awareness. Pay attention to those times when you're feeling, maybe a little too confident or when you're brushing off feedback. Ask yourself, am I being realistic here? Am I open to other perspectives?
So basically, just be honest with ourselves about our strengths and weaknesses and be willing to admit when we're wrong.
Exactly. Embrace humility. It doesn't mean, thinking less of yourself. It just means thinking of yourself less. Shift that focus outward, away from your own ego and toward the needs of others.
Recognizing that, we're all connected. And our successes, they're often the result of, collaboration and support from others, not just our own brilliance.
Right. The book also says it's really important to acknowledge our limits. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and pretending to be something we're not, well, that'll always backfire. So be honest with yourself about your capabilities, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it.
Embrace the imperfections.
Yeah.
I can get behind that. Okay, let's talk about purpose. Chapter 13 really explores this, this human need for direction and meaning, especially, in a world that feels so chaotic.
The book says that especially now, when those traditional structures and belief systems have weakened, finding a sense of purpose is more important than ever. Otherwise, we just feel lost, adrift, you know?
We're just going through the motions, no real meaning.
Exactly. The book tells the story of Martin Luther King Jr. He faced so much opposition, internal struggles, all of it. But he found his purpose in the fight for civil rights. It fueled him.
His story is incredible. It's a good reminder that finding your purpose, it's not about achieving some, big predefined goal. It's about connecting with something much deeper, something that resonates with you.
You got it. It's about aligning your actions with your values. Finding meaning in those everyday struggles. It doesn't have to be some huge world-changing mission, It could be something as simple as being a good friend, bringing joy to your community. The point is to find something that really gives your life meaning.
Okay, so how do we even start to look for this thing, this purpose? It can feel so elusive.
The book makes it really clear finding your purpose, it's not a one-time thing. It's not like you just have this aha moment and then you're done. Okay. It's an ongoing process,
Yep.
You're constantly discovering and refining it. It can evolve as you evolve.
So it's not about finding the perfect purpose. It's more about, paying attention to what excites you, what you're passionate about, and then, taking action, even small steps to align yourself with that.
That's it. It's about asking yourself those big questions. What really motivates me? What are those activities that make me feel most alive? What kind of impact do I want to make on the world? Be willing to experiment, try new things, see where they lead you.
So much of this boils down to self-awareness, doesn't it? Paying attention to those, moments of inspiration.
Yeah.
And then having the courage to actually follow them.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Building on that idea of self-awareness, let's talk about, how our generation shapes us. We talked about that a little in part 1, but chapter 18 really goes deep. It's about how, those societal trends, those historical events, they impact entire generations. Their values, their beliefs, their fears.
It's like we're all swimming in these cultural currents, and they're shaping us even if we don't realize it. We talked about World War II and the silent generation, the sexual revolution and Gen X, and then, of course, 9/11 and millennials. Right.
Right. And those are just a few examples, Think about the big events, the cultural trends, the technology, all that stuff that happened during your formative years. How did those things shape your values, your fears, your hopes for the future?
Like if you grew up during, I don't know, a time of economic boom, maybe you're more likely to take risks, be an entrepreneur. But if you grew up during a recession, maybe you're more cautious and security-minded, right?
Yep.
It's about understanding how our generation has imprinted on us in ways we may not even realize.
Exactly. And once we see those influences, we can be more intentional, right? We can decide which parts we want to embrace and which parts we want to, maybe challenge or reject. It's about taking ownership of our story instead of just being swept along by the tide.
So powerful. It's like saying, okay, this is how my generation has shaped me, but I don't have to be defined by that. I can choose how I move forward.
You got it. The book also talks about how we can use our understanding of these generational patterns to, actually achieve our goals. Like if you're trying to market something to a specific generation, you have to understand them, right? What are their values, their aspirations? What kind of communication style resonates with them? Works for millennials might not work for baby boomers.
Totally different languages. It's about tailoring the message. Taking into account all those generational experiences.
Makes sense, right. But it goes beyond marketing, The book also says that understanding generational patterns can help us improve our relationships.
Oh, I see that. Like if you can understand how your partner's worldview has been shaped by, their generation, it can help you navigate those conflicts, and communicate more effectively.
It's about realizing that their reactions, they might not be personal, It might just be their generational conditioning.
It's like a decoder ring for relationships.
I like that. It's about bridging those generational divides. And, on a bigger level, the book says that if we understand generational patterns, it can help us create a more just and equitable society.
That's a big idea.
Right. By seeing those systemic advantages and disadvantages that different generations have faced, we can work towards, a more level playing field. It's about remembering that we're all connected, and that the well-being of one generation is tied to the well-being of, all generations.
So true. Okay, before we move on to the next part, I have to ask about this. The book talks about, like, the elusive object of desire.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more. Is this about, like, how to make ourselves irresistible?
It's about understanding how desire works, how to make ourselves more attractive and how to resist, those manipulative tactics that others might use. One of the things it talks about is scarcity. The less available something is, the more we tend to want it.
So if we make ourselves too available, too eager to please, we actually make ourselves less desirable.
Exactly. The book says to cultivate a little bit of mystery, intrigue. Don't put it all out there right away. Hold back a little. Spark their curiosity.
So it's about creating that aura of, like, desirability,
Yeah.
Draw people in instead of chasing after them.
Exactly. And be selective. If you're always available, always saying yes, you diminish your value. Be discerning. Who do you spend your time with? What opportunities do you pursue?
Have some standards.
Right. And, strategic absence, that can be really effective too.
Right.
Sometimes the best way to make someone miss you is to, step away for a little while. Give them a chance to realize what they're missing.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder,
Right.
But this isn't about, like, manipulating people or playing games.
No, not at all. It's about mutual respect, genuine attraction. It's not about control. The book is very clear about that. It's about being authentic, being yourself and letting that shine through. When you're comfortable with who you are, it creates this natural magnetism that people are drawn to.
Be yourself. Got it.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk about this. In a world of, like, total information overload,
Yeah.
how do we, elevate our perspective? How do we think beyond the immediate moment?
Chapter 6, this is where the book gets into the law of short-sightedness. It's about how, we're wired for that instant gratification, but that can really sabotage our long-term goals.
Makes sense.
The book talks about John Law, way back in the 18th century, financier, a really smart guy, but he came up with this, brilliant scheme, but it was ultimately a total disaster, led to the collapse of the French economy.
Oh, wow.
He was so focused on those potential profits, He completely missed all those warning signs, didn't see the long-term consequences of his actions.
Penny wise and pound foolish. I guess sometimes we get so caught up in the short term, We miss the bigger picture, and then we end up losing big time.
Exactly. So how do we overcome that? How do we stop being so short-sighted? The book says to start by developing a long-term perspective. Where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? What can you do today to start moving towards those goals?
It's like having that vision, right, to guide your decisions.
That's it. And practice delaying gratification. Resist that urge to indulge every little whim. Work towards something meaningful, something lasting. It might mean some sacrifice in the short term, but those long-term rewards, so worth it.
It's about having the discipline to say no to that instant gratification.
The book also says to cultivate patience. Success, it rarely happens overnight. Be willing to put in the work, even when the payoff seems far off. The best things in life, they usually take time.
Play the long game. Love that. But what about when we need to get other people on board with our vision, right? How do we overcome resistance? Persuade people to buy into our ideas?
Chapter 7, this is all about the art of persuasion. It's understanding that people are naturally resistant to change, and then figuring out how to work with that.
We can't just, force our ideas on people?
Nope. The book says one of the most effective ways to persuade someone is to, actually confirm their self-opinion. Make them feel understood, like you get them, even if you disagree with their point of view.
It's like we talked about before, right? Acknowledging how they see themselves disarms their defenses.
No. And then you can appeal to their self-interest. Frame your argument in a way that shows them how they'll benefit. Find that win-win.
So it's not about manipulating them. It's about showing them how what you're proposing actually aligns with what they want.
Exactly. It also helps to build trust, Spend time getting to know people, show them you're a good person, that you're trustworthy. People are more likely to be persuaded by, someone they like and respect.
It's about building that foundation of trust first, so they know you're coming from a good place.
The book also says that storytelling is really powerful. Stories connect with people on an emotional level. They help people feel the message, not just think about it.
Stories are so powerful, they make those abstract ideas come alive.
Right. So, use anecdotes, metaphors, examples, all that good stuff. The book also mentions using scarcity,
Yeah.
highlighting the fact that something is, limited or a special opportunity.
But that's got to be used carefully, right?
Yeah.
Too much of that, and it feels manipulative.
Absolutely. It's about finding that right balance. And lastly, be persistent. Don't give up easily. Overcoming resistance takes patience. Resilience,
He's got to be willing to keep trying.
success rarely comes easy, right? There'll be setbacks, there'll be challenges, but it's those who keep going. They're the ones who ultimately succeed. Okay, so we've talked a lot about individuals, but the book also gets into, how those individuals function in groups, right?
Oh, yeah, this is so important. I mean, whether we're talking about work teams or families or even whole societies, understanding how groups work, that's essential.
Absolutely. And one of the first things the book says is that groups, they kind of have a life of their own. It's not just about the individuals. There's this whole other dynamic that emerges when people come together.
So it's like each group has its own personality, its own culture.
Exactly. And the book says before you try to, lead or influence a group, you have to understand its culture. Every group has its own values, its own beliefs, its own behaviors. Some are hierarchical, some are more collaborative, right? Some are afraid of taking risks. Others are all about innovation.
So it's like you have to do your homework before you step into a new environment.
Totally.
Observe, listen, understand the rules of the game before you try to, change anything.
Exactly. And it's also important to figure out who the key players are, who are the influencers, the decision makers. Once you see those dynamics, you can start building relationships and alliances strategically.
It's like a game of chess.
Right. Know the players and the board before you make your move. And be aware of groupthink. This is when, a group becomes too homogenous and people stop thinking critically because they want to keep the peace.
So it's like everyone's so focused on agreeing that they miss those red flags,
Right.
or they don't consider alternative viewpoints.
Right. So to avoid that, encourage open communication. Make sure people feel safe to disagree, value those different perspectives.
I mean, conflict can be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
It can lead to better ideas.
Absolutely. You can even assign someone the role of, devil's advocate. Their job is to poke holes in the plan and point out the potential problems.
I like that. Make sure you're thinking things through.
And don't be afraid to get some outside perspectives. Bring in people who aren't part of the group to get a fresh take.
Sometimes those outsiders, they see things that we miss.
They can really shake things up. Now, of course, the book also looks at the dark side of groups, how easily they can turn into us versus them mentalities. We have this deep need to belong, right? To be part of a group that shares our values. But that can so easily lead to tribalism, prejudice, even hostility towards, those who are different.
Yeah, we see this play out all the time, in politics and social media. It gets ugly.
It can get really dangerous. The book uses the example of, the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Society was just completely divided and millions of people were persecuted. It's a scary example of how our tribal instincts, they can be exploited.
So how do we resist that? How do we avoid getting caught up in, those cycles of fear and hate?
It starts with self-awareness. Recognize your own tribal instincts and how they might be affecting you. Are you quick to judge people who are different? Do you automatically assume the worst about, someone who's part of a different group?
Check your biases.
Right. And cultivate empathy. Try to see things from their perspective. Focus on what you have in common.
We all share the same basic human needs, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're all more alike than we are different.
The book also stresses critical thinking. Don't just blindly follow your group, Question everything. Challenge dogma. Think for yourself.
Don't be afraid to speak up when you see injustice.
Yeah. True belonging, it's not about conforming, It's about embracing your own individuality and respecting the individuality of others. Okay, so we've talked about, understanding how groups work, resisting that tribalism. But now I'm curious about, aggression. It's a part of human nature, right?
Definitely.
Chapter 19, it actually says that aggression, it's not just about violence, It's about that assertive energy that we need to achieve our goals, to overcome obstacles.
So it could actually be a positive force.
Absolutely. It's that energy that fuels our ambition, our drive. It's how we protect ourselves and those we love. The key is to channel it in a healthy way.
Okay, so how do we tell the difference between healthy aggression and, the kind that leads to destructive behavior?
Pay attention to the signs of unhealthy aggression, anger, hostility, bullying, that need to control and dominate. Notice those patterns and try to address them early, before they escalate.
So be aware of your anger and how you're expressing it.
The book suggests finding healthy outlets for that assertive energy.
Yeah.
Things like sports, competition, creative pursuits.
Right, like channel that energy instead of letting it bottle up and explode.
Learn how to assert yourself effectively. Communicate your needs and boundaries clearly without resorting to anger or aggression.
Stand up for yourself, but do it respectfully.
The book also says to develop a thick skin. Not everything is a personal attack. Don't sweat the small stuff.
Choose your battles.
And sometimes, the best response is to just walk away. True strength, it's not about overpowering others. It's about mastering yourself. Okay, ready for a big one. Let's talk about death.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm ready. But that's a heavy topic.
It is. Chapter 20 explores it in this really interesting way. It's about accepting that death is, inevitable, right? And then figuring out how to live with that knowledge.
Our culture's so weird about death, It's like we pretend it doesn't exist.
We're obsessed with extending life, but we forget how to actually live it. The book says we need to face our own mortality, not in this morbid way,
right.
but to help us clarify our priorities, to really appreciate how precious life is.
It's like that saying, live every day like it's your last. Not recklessly, but with a sense of appreciation.
Right. So how do we do this? The book says to start by cultivating gratitude. Take a moment each day to appreciate those little things.
The simple things.
Exactly. The beauty of nature, spending time with loved ones, a delicious meal, It's about shifting our focus from what we don't have to what we do have. It's about shifting our focus from what we don't have to what we do have and savoring those moments of joy and connection.
Train ourselves to see the beauty in, the everyday stuff instead of always chasing after that, elusive future happiness.
Exactly. Another strategy is to really try to live in the present moment.
Yeah.
Let go of all those regrets about the past, the worries about the future, and just be here now.
Be present.
Yeah. The book also says to, really think about the meaning and purpose of our lives. What legacy do you want to leave behind? What impact do you want to have on the world?
Connecting with something bigger than ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Gives our lives, meaning and direction, even though we know, our time here is limited.
When you connect with a purpose that's, bigger than your own lifespan, you can find real fulfillment and, make a positive impact.
This is so powerful. It's like we're changing how we think about death, right? It's not this thing to be afraid of, but a way to actually live more fully, more intentionally.
The book reminds us that death, it's not the end. It's more like a transition, a new phase of existence. It's a reminder that we're all part of this interconnected web of life and that our individual journeys, they all fit into a larger tapestry of meaning.
Okay, so we've talked about some, deep stuff, but let's circle back to the shadow for a minute. We talked about how it develops, how it can, really mess us up, and how we can start to, explore those hidden parts of ourselves. But the book also says that the shadow isn't something we should be afraid of. In fact, it can actually be a source of power and creativity.
That's right. It reminds us that the shadow is a part of us, We can't just ignore it. We all have light and dark inside. And embracing that shadow is how we become whole, authentic.
So it's not about trying to get rid of those darker parts of ourselves. It's about, understanding them, learning to work with them, even using their energy in a positive way.
Exactly. The shadow is where we keep our, repressed desires, our fears, even, our unlived potential. When we bring that stuff into the light, we can use it to fuel our growth and, even our creativity.
That's an amazing idea. It's like we're taking back those parts of ourselves that we've rejected and, actually using them to help us flourish.
The book suggests exploring the shadow through, journaling, dream work, therapy, honest self-reflection. It's not easy, It takes courage, but it's so worth it.
It's like we're going on this archaeological dig, but inside ourselves.
Yeah.
Uncovering these hidden treasures that we've buried.
Okay. Are you ready for one last mind-blowing concept? How do we cultivate a sense of, freedom and liberation in a world that often feels, constricting, limiting?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I need to hear right now. I mean, it's so easy to feel trapped, overwhelmed with, just the demands of modern life. How do we find that, inner freedom in the middle of all the chaos?
Chapter 8, this is where the book really gets into this. It gives us some great insights into how to break free from, all these limiting beliefs, negative patterns, and, the expectations of others. The key is to remember that true freedom, it's an inside job. You know, it's not about our circumstances.
So it's not about, just running away from our responsibilities or living a life without any rules. It's about finding that inner peace, that autonomy, no matter what's happening around us.
The book uses Anton Chekhov, the Russian writer, as an example. I mean, he grew up in poverty, faced all these challenges, but he still cultivated the sense of inner freedom. He pursued his passions, built a meaningful life, left behind this amazing legacy.
It's inspiring, right? It reminds us that true freedom, it's not about having the perfect life. It's about having that strength, that resilience to, deal with all those challenges, the ups and downs, with grace and purpose.
Exactly. Chekhov, he shows us that freedom, it's not about escaping our circumstances, but about changing how we see them. Remembering that we have the power to choose our thoughts, our attitudes, how we respond to things.
We always have a choice.
Right. The book gives some tips for, cultivating that inner freedom. First, identify and challenge your limiting beliefs. What are those negative thoughts that are holding you back? Where did those beliefs come from? Are they even true?
It's like those voices in our head.
Yeah.
Telling us we're not good enough, not smart enough. You got to learn to shut those voices down.
Question them, challenge them, replace them with beliefs that actually, support you and your goals.
Rewire your brain for happiness. Love it. But it's not all about our thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Our actions are important too.
Totally. The book also says to practice detachment. Let go of your attachment to, specific outcomes, external validation, all the stuff you can't control. Focus on your efforts, your intentions, not the results.
Surrender to the flow. Let go of that need to control everything.
The book also talks about finding that meaning and purpose we were talking about before. When you have a purpose, you're less likely to feel trapped. You have something to guide you, a reason to get out of bed each morning.
Your North Star.
Yeah. Exactly. And don't forget gratitude.
Yeah.
Focusing on what you have instead of what you don't have, that can make you feel so much more free.
It's like, counting your blessings,
Yeah.
even those small ones. Recognizing all the good stuff you already have.
Right. And remember, true freedom, it's not about being alone. It's about connection, meaningful relationships, contributing to something bigger than yourself, finding your place in the world.
We're all connected. Our well-being depends on, the well-being of everyone else.
Wow, we have covered so much today. I mean, from the shadow to purpose to our generation to, death. What a journey.
This book is amazing. I'm going to keep coming back to it. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a little challenge. Think about one specific action you can take, based on what we've talked about, something that will help you become, more empowered, more fulfilled.
It could be starting that dream journal, to explore your shadow. Maybe it's setting aside time to connect with your purpose, or practicing detachment, or, working on that growth mindset. Whatever it is, choose one thing and do it. Your deep dive into human nature has just begun.